Alright, it is perhaps worth contextualizing what these FIA mandates are going to do in regards to porpoising and and how it's going to affect different teams. This might be a little technical. There's a few graphs. Okay, there's a few graphs that have come out. I mean, you can go through them over. They've come out over a few Grand Prix. You can go through some of them. There's really only one that matters, and it's the data from Australia, supposedly. Now, I'm not entirely sure how to read this, but how I'm reading this and what the cars look like when they do actually porpoise, and we do know it's a problem for all the teams. They just have a different profile of porpoising. Everyone was most pronounced in Baku, but I digress. The Ferrari, I don't know why this is, but it looks like it's bouncing off a pocket of air, compressed air. They would have so much air going under their car that it actually pushes back off of it and tries to reach some sort of escape from all this pressure, from all this air pressure, and then the aerodynamic dynamics of the car, they just force it back down to the ground. And it's a different problem to what Mercedes are having, because it's their body itself that's actually, I mean, Ferrari, their body does contact the ground, but it's just because the oscillation goes a little haywire, and there's momentum that has to be expelled somehow. Right, whereas the Mercedes, their body actually accelerates towards the ground. So if you're plotting this vertically on a graph, the y-axis, the Ferrari has a positive acceleration going away from the ground, and the Mercedes has a negative acceleration going towards the ground. It's on the y-axis, right? So their body hits the ground, and it's not like they hit the ground in sympathy, in response to just the dynamics of the car being thrown off by aerodynamic effects of the car. It's not like they just hit the ground in sympathy. It's that the car hits the ground because it's trying to actually go towards the ground, right? They've got so much downforce going on the cars. Not to say the Ferrari doesn't have downforce, it's just that perhaps the way their floor is designed, and this is why I posted the B Sport video in the link of interest in the previous video. Perhaps just because of the way their floor is designed and the way the air escapes from its peak compression from the floor. Perhaps this is what's making this happen, but the car is actually trying to go through the ground, and it contacts the ground so hard in a Baku, in its most extreme, that it lifts the tires. It quite literally lifts the tires off the road, and then they've got contact patch problems because the tires are the only contact patch with the road, and now suddenly you can't even steer the car. It's like you're aquaplaning, just just without the water, if that's even a decent description. And yeah, it's a different context for Mercedes, this porpoising thing. I mean, there are other teams that do quote unquote lose control of their car in the same way. Their drivers do lose control of the car in the same way, but it's just not like the Mercedes, right? And is it a health issue? Yes, they've come out, it's a health issue, the whole shebang. So they have to make a change. They're going to make a sporting change. So they're going to bring back plank measurements at the end of the Grand Prix, and they can get like really pedantic with it, and they can have tolerance limits under a millimeter if they so want to, right? They can get very pedantic with. I'm not sure what they're going to do exactly in regards to how much wear is going to be allowed on the planks. that hasn't actually been decided yet. This Canadian Grand Prix is just the weekend where they have decided that this is going to be something that is in consideration and will probably be put in play. And this is another thing about whatever changes that they make, in the short term at least, and that they have to have a sporting consideration to them. You know, it's one thing to drop active suspension on the formula in the off season, right? Or even in 2 off seasons time, or what have you. It's one thing to do that. It's another thing to drop active suspension, like boom, in the middle of the season. Here you go. Have some active suspension on your car by Silverstone if you're up for it. Like that would be a bit absurd. The tires have not actually been tested for that, so there would be a different safety concern, and it would get very complicated. Whatever technical change they make in the medium and perhaps long term, we'll always have to consider what the tires can actually do until we stop using tires, whenever that may be, very far in the future. But there will always be like these secondary considerations to whatever regulation change you want to make. And it's a problem already that the cars are overweight. That's already a problem. That's already a problem. So they can't actually get too fruity with it and add more weight to the cars. Well, they probably can, but we first have to see what actually happens with this Canadian Grand Prix, and then probably somewhere like Singapore as well. But anyway, that's for when we get there. But this is what the porpoising looks like to me. I'm not an expert. This is data from Australia. It's notable what Red Bull were doing here, because they were running their car lower, their skids were more active, and their car had very little movement as a result. Now, then they haven't run the car that low since. They haven't actually run it that low since. And what that perhaps means is that there are indeed aerodynamic consequences to where and how you deploy your ice skates. And Red Bull, they don't even have to run the car that low to have these skids sparking up all the time. Or who knows, perhaps they changed the material on the skids to something that doesn't spark, and they've been active the whole time. Who knows? It could be something wild like that. I'm not a materials expert, so I don't even have materials knowledge. Like, that's some very arcane. They could have done anything with it. To me, it looks like they haven't run the car that low since the likes of Australia, because it wasn't actually beneficial. It wasn't beneficial to run the car that low. But you know, at the end of the day, I really was. I was hoping, one, the FIA would give us a little more time to cook over, and two, that the teams would have been a little more responsible. But yeah, this is Formula One, isn't it? This is how they play. This is how they play. And because the teams couldn't be just a little bit more responsible, and drivers got beat up in their cockpits over the course of the Baku Grand Prix. And it was a different Baku Grand Prix because there was no real stoppage to it. So it was like, it was endless, as it were. And on some level, I do really just wish that the teams had been, Mercedes in particular, had just been a little more responsible with how they set up the car leading up to this FIA ruling, this FIA mandate leading up to this. I do just wish everyone had just been a little more responsible. But perhaps I'm asking too much from these F1 teams. I don't know. Seems to be asking too much nowadays. I mean, there's data from Barcelona. I don't consider the Barcelona data all that valuable, because, well, F1 has diversified its tracks far too much now for every track to be state of the art, Barcelona circuit, right? So this isn't representative data, but the Barcelona does the circuit, the Circuit de Catalunya, it does provide a worthwhile testing platform for outright performance envelopes for the cars. It does still provide that, but it's not a it's not a testing ground for these porpoising fixes or what have you, by the look of it. Still, I expect everyone to be running pretty smoothly, at least relatively smoothly, at least comparatively to Baku. For the rest of this Canadian weekend, I don't expect anything. Well, maybe the Ferrari will be doing its hop and skip, but I don't really expect it to be a narrative aside from whatever it is that the FIA may or may not decide to do after this plank measuring coming back. And just for posterity on the plank measuring scenario that's coming in, what this means is that if your car is going to porpoise, well, if you can have your car porpoise and it doesn't wear out the plank, then it's probably safe for drivers. So you'll be able to continue running your car the same, pretty much. So I don't see these technical mandates being brought in affecting Ferrari, even in the short term with this plank measuring thing. I don't see that affecting Ferrari. But it will be affecting Mercedes because, like I said, their car looks like it's trying to travel into the ground, quite literally. It's got so much downforce, it's trying to dig itself into the road. And that means that it will, of course, scrape scrape a whole lot of layers off of the plank. So whatever they do bring in the medium term will be interesting. But short term, yeah, Mercedes are not having a good time with whatever is being suggested here. But anyway, that's that. There is some other interesting piece of information. This dropped, what was it? Was this at the start of FP2, I believe? Well, they dropped this car development chart. It was such a bizarre drop, but they dropped this chart, and well, one, I question when exactly this data was gotten. Two, I think it's irresponsible to be putting the Ferrari above the Red Bull, unless Leclerc is just that much faster than Sainz, unless Leclerc is just that much faster. But otherwise, I do feel that's irresponsible, even by 0.04 seconds, what have you, 400th of a second. The Mercedes, this is gonna probably be where they stay for the whole season. They're kind of in no man's land. Perhaps by the end of the season, they might drop back a little into the midfield. Remains to be seen what exactly happens there. Remains to be seen. But they're gonna run out of budget at some point. I would say Spa, and then the team start dropping off from there. But we'll really have to see what happens, and I would have to look at the schedule again. McLaren. Where do McLaren go from here? Well, their Silverstone upgrade matters a lot. They're a local team. All right, they're in Milton Keynes. They're pretty much local, so they're gonna have. They should have a big upgrade package coming for Silverstone, and then we'll see how their car develops from there. But I mean, every team should have a big upgrade package coming for Silverstone, right? So everyone will be getting faster getting faster or slower relative to everyone else. The only other real points of interest here well, aside from this Alpine and AlphaTauri switching places like this, aside from that, the only other real interesting piece of info is this Aston Martin. Look at the gains. Oh, look at the gain. They did a trace-up job. Look at the gains. Now, look, I still think they were sandbagging. I think the data that they got in Spain was very valuable. It was so valuable that they could even afford to sandbag for a few Grand Prix. What's the canon gonna be that they put out? Oh, they just had to learn how to set up the car first or what have you. I mean, they can throw out whatever canon they want, but they're gonna have some upgrades. Might just be like wing upgrades. Maybe we just reprofiled the front wing or the rear wing or something. They'll have something like that for Silverstone. So they're still getting upgrades all the same, like everyone. It's not like they're just unlocking the same car again and again. It's getting modified. So for me, at this point, it looks like they were sandbagging. In Spain, after that FP2, they were like, oh, we got the data. This car is getting a lot of heat. Let's wait for the heat to die down. And the heat died down. When Red Bull dropped their inquiry. I mean, there's no reason to sandbag after that. I mean, no one kicked up a fuss with the Monaco lottery with Sebastian Vettel getting his finishing position. No one kicked up a fuss. Likewise, Baku, no one kicked up a fuss. And now it's too late to complain about it. So it'll be very interesting to see how does Lance Stroll do this weekend in Canada? I'm very interested to see what happens with him. Very interested. I don't know, maybe they could fish out a podium or something if either Ferrari or Red Bull choke up something. They could probably fish out a podium for someone. Or perhaps it rains in the Grand Prix, though it's not forecasted to rain, but perhaps it rains. Now, Stroll always been a little spicy in the rain. But anyway, I don't want to make predictions going into a Canadian Grand Prix. It's also a very difficult Grand Prix to predict. Much like Baku, it's very difficult to say what exactly could happen during a Canadian Grand Prix. But otherwise, that should be the vid. Peace.
Hell breezy. Let me show you how to keep the dice rolling when you're doing that thing over there. Hey, let's go! Cause I'm feeling like I'm running and I'm feeling like I gotta get away. Better know that I don't and I won't ever stop. Cause you know I gotta win every day. Go! See, really wanna pop me. Go! Just know that you will never flop me. And I know that I gotta be a little cocky. Go! You ain't never gonna stop me. Every time I come a nigga gotta set it, then I gotta go and then I gotta get it, then I gotta blow it, and I gotta shut it. Any little thing a nigga think that he be doing, cause it doesn't matter, cause I'm gonna dead it. Then I'm gonna murder everything and anything about it. Boom, about a bing. I gotta do a lot of things to make it clearer to a couple niggas that I always win, and then I gotta get it again and again and again. And I be doing it to death, and now I move a little foul. Nigga better call a rap, and everybody know my style. Niggas know that I'm the best when it comes to doing this, and I be banging on my chest, and I bang in the east, and I banging in the west, and I kinda give you more, and I will never give you less. You will hear it in the street, and you can read it in the press. Do you really wanna know what's next? Let's go. See the way we on it, and we all up in the race, and you know we gotta go now, try to keep up with the pace, and we struggling and hustling and set it, and I get it, and we always gotta do it, take it to another place, gotta taste it, and I gotta grab it, and I gotta cut all through this traffic just to be at the top of the throne, but I know I gotta have it.